What is up, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to dive into what line size matters. Okay, line size is something that it sounds like, okay, Jay, line size, we get it, we know it. If you're new to the channel or new to bass fishing, this is something you need to know. And then if you were an expert or advanced or know some things pretty well, you're probably going to learn a couple of things in this. So let's dive into it right now.
Let's go.
We're here in Mexico. We are in the Dominican Republic. So I'm gonna tell you a couple different tips that have helped me over the years.
Wow! Unbelievable! Jacob Wheeler makes history!
Okay, so this right here is my little spooler. Sorry, y'all. I literally just crashed it all up. But this is my little line spool. This is like I think it's called a Spoolin' Buddy. Anyway, so this sort of works pretty well for me just because when I'm on the road, I actually just got it. So I have all my line size. I throw Suffix Advanced Fluorocarbon. See right there, they come in like 1,200 yard spools. They come in smaller spools too. But I'm gonna typically really focus on this line, just fluorocarbon in general, because that is mostly the #1 line that most bass fishermen use. Now, I'm looking down through here. Actually, let me do something real quick here. Sorry, y'all. I'm gonna take him off. Hold up. Okay, so we're gonna dive into the big thing about line size. Line size obviously is really important with certain applications, but this is gonna be we're not gonna go crazy in depth on the advanced side of this. We will go into a couple different things, but this is the first thing you need to know. Okay, what line do you choose for your particular application? So if it's a spinnerbait, okay, in general, reaction baits in general, like so baits that I'm keeping up higher. So you think 5 foot or less. I'm going to go with something 17 pound or more, or 14 or more. Now this is the key, okay? Reaction baits or spinner baits or vibrating jigs, typically you're not going to mess up the action. You have to factor in, okay, cover, that's a huge deal. So are you open water, you cover. Okay, the key ultimately, your diameter is going to make a huge difference in how that bait, how much it goes and dives. So even with a vibrating jig, it's gonna have less drag on the water, even though there's a lot of drag with the blade, you're gonna get it a little bit deeper if you throw 14 over 17. Now, the one thing that you have to know when you're picking that right size line for your application, so say you have like one brand that you really like, that you just, for whatever reason, you like their 17 pound test. So many people will look at some line and they'll be like, oh man, 17 pound test is exactly what I want. The big key is looking at the actual diameter. This one's right here is 0.015 or millimeters 0.38 of millimeters in 17 pound line. That is the big key. So if you're trying to match up your applications, a lot of people will pick up something. There'll be other lines out there that are really heavy, okay? Really heavy with the diameter of the actual line, and they'll say, hey, it's 10 pound test. Well, in Suffix, it might be 12 pound test, but the diameter is the same. So, well, man, my 10's super strong. That is what, pound test is really not what it comes down to. It really comes down to the diameter of the line, because that is ultimately what is affecting your lure. So in general, I pick something as far as line size, the smallest I can get away with most of the time. Now, there's certain times that it's definitely going to affect lure action. So I'll give you for instance, okay? Of course, crankbaits, okay? Crankbaits is diving down. I have like a DT8 right here, okay? This is a perfect example, so I actually tested this. On 14 pound test, a DT8 will go about 7.5 feet. On 8 pound test, a DT8 will go right at about 10.5, 11 on a cast. So, and it can even get deeper than that. I mean, that's just sort of like quick testing. So that makes a huge difference. If you have one rod that has 10 pound test on it and another rod that has 12 pound test on it, it could be a big difference of a foot of that bait diving and that bait's diving depth. Typically, it doesn't affect the action too much on some of those deeper diving crankbaits or those plugs that are going a little bit deeper, but it definitely can overpower it, especially like when you're throwing like little flat sides, you know, or anything like that. Smaller baits, you might have to go down in your pound test and your diameter of your line to ultimately allow that bait to have the correct action. Now, the one thing that I do see, as I said, reaction baits like vibrating jigs and spinner baits where you actually have the drag coming from the actual blade on the vibrating jig or the spinner bait with the actual blade on the spinner bait, I typically throw 20 pound test. I can throw 17, but that day in and day out, I'm gonna throw I'm gonna throw a heavier pound test. Now that depends on ultimately if I'm trying to get the depth of that bait. If I feel like I have grass down there in 8 foot of water, some hydrilla with a vibrating jigger spinnerbait, and I have nothing else to get hung up on, it's just straight hydrilla grass, I might go down to 14 and throw a 1/2 ounce vibrating jig to get it down there a little bit more efficiently. So that's all it really comes down to. Now, sometimes, I hear a lot of people talk about, oh man, I gotta drop down, in pound tests, I gotta drop down to 8, I gotta drop down to 10. There are times where fish will get line shy, okay? But overall, that is, general consensus. If most line I'm gonna use, is going to be between 14 and 20 pound tests on my casting equipment, okay? So some people it's 15, but 14 to 20 pound test is what I'm going to be using. So 17 is 0.15 for the people that are looking at that. 14 0.13 and 20 is 0.17. So minuscule, but it does make a big difference in the way your bait reacts. I'll tell you another very particular situation. I remember fishing a tournament and I was throwing 20, flipping a jig. When you're flipping, like I'm gonna flip, big stick, 7/6. I try to get away with the lightest line possible when flipping. It's just because ultimately the way that your bait falls and acts, this is what line does, is the drag on your bait, especially with bottom baits. The drag on your bait does not act as natural. You will get way more bites on 14 pound tests than you will 20 pound tests, especially in cleaner water, especially when the fish are a little bit more fickle, or they're spawning, or they're being a little bit more, a little bit more picky, if you will. So I try to go on the lower end if I can, because it's really the drag of that bait. Even if you look at it on like a swim bait or any of those, it's keeping that bait up and making it more unnatural the higher pound test you go up. And so like when I have a swim bait, I'm throwing like a 1/2 ounce Largo shad or something like that. I'll throw a 12 pound test or even 10 if I'm fishing it super deep, because as I'm crawling that bait down there, I do not want that drag to lift the bait up. So long story short, pay attention to your diameter of your line. If you're switching different companies, make sure to pay attention to that. Then also try to go on the lower side if you can, and pay attention to the cover that you're dealing with. That's really what it comes down to. Nothing too crazy this one. I might do another one. I have a couple ideas for this line series, and I'm not gonna do like a ton of different stuff, but I wanted to it's something that I've learned more about the way my bait falls. Now that I can see my bait on active target, I can really see what's going on. So you can tell a huge difference of how fast your bait falls in general to switching it up on line size. So anyway, hope you guys enjoyed this one. Maybe you learned a little bit that might help your next fishing trip. Appreciate you all following the channel. We'll see you next time.